Ethan sat on the edge of the grassy hill, staring up at the stars. The sky on this alien planet was unlike any other he had seen. The stars were brighter, and the moons cast a soft light on the surface of the planet. He had been stationed here for months, part of a small peacekeeping mission, and it had been one of the most eye-opening experiences of his life. He had met many different beings from various parts of the galaxy, but none of them had fascinated him more than Lyra. She was a Zorathi, one of the most intelligent and peaceful species he had encountered. The Zorathi were known for their advanced technology, their deep understanding of the universe, and their ancient culture. Ethan first met Lyra when he was assigned to research the plant life of the planet. She had been his guide, explaining the various species of plants and their uses in Zorathi medicine and cuisine. What started as a professional relationship had slowly turned into something more. Ethan found himself drawn to her calm presence, her beautiful violet eyes, and the way she spoke of the universe as if she truly understood its mysteries. They had spent countless hours together, discussing everything from the stars to philosophy. Lyra had an incredible way of making the most complex ideas seem simple, and Ethan admired her intellect. It was easy to forget that she was from another world entirely. To him, she felt almost human, though there was something otherworldly about her beauty, something that made his heart race every time she smiled. One evening, after a long day of research, Ethan and Lyra sat together on the hill, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The air was cool, and the distant sounds of alien creatures echoed in the background. It was peaceful, a perfect moment to enjoy the company of someone who had become more than just a colleague to him. "I wish I could marry someone like you," Ethan said, without thinking. He wasn't sure why he said it. Maybe it was the way the light of the two moons made Lyra's face glow. Perhaps it was the feeling that had been growing inside him for weeks. But the words had slipped out before he could stop them. For a moment, there was silence. Lyra turned to him, her violet eyes meeting his. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had expected her to laugh, to brush off his comment as a simple joke, but instead, she didn't smile. She looked at him seriously, her expression unreadable. "You cannot marry someone like me," she said softly. Her voice full of depth. Ethan blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "What do you mean?" he asked. Lyra's gaze softened, but there was an intensity in her eyes that made Ethan uneasy. "You do not understand the customs of my people," she said. "We do not choose partners based on simple desires. Our traditions go back centuries, and they are not as you imagine. You cannot just wish to marry someone like me." Ethan's mind raced. "I don't understand. What do you mean by that?" Lyra turned her gaze to the stars above them. "There is a process," she said, "a series of trials, a journey that one must take in order to prove their worthiness." Ethan was confused. Trials, worthiness? What kind of trials?" Lyra didn't immediately answer. She looked back at him, her expression serious. "Before a Zorathi can marry, they must prove themselves in a way that goes beyond simple attraction or affection. It is not about love in the way you understand it. It is about strength, wisdom, and selflessness. The suitor must show that they understand the deeper meaning of commitment, of what it truly means to be a part of the Zorathi way of life." Ethan swallowed hard. He had never heard of anything like this before. On Earth, relationships were complicated enough, but he couldn't imagine having to prove yourself through trials before even considering marriage. "So, you're saying that I can't marry you because I haven't earned it?" Lyra nodded slowly. "Yes, but it is not just about earning my hand. It is about earning the respect of my people. Our traditions are old, and they are sacred. Only those who truly understand the Zorathi way can be a part of it." Ethan's mind was still trying to process all of this. He had never thought of marriage as something you had to prove yourself for. He had always imagined it as a simple, natural bond between two people. But the Zorathi were different. Their customs were ancient and deeply ingrained in their culture. "Is there any way I can prove myself?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Lyra smiled softly, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Perhaps, but the journey is long and difficult. It is not a path to be taken lightly." Ethan didn't know what to say. His heart was pounding in his chest. He had never considered that there might be barriers to being with someone like Lyra. And yet, here she was, telling him that the very idea of a relationship between them was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. "I don't even know what the trials are," he said, his voice filled with uncertainty. Lyra turned to him, her gaze intense. "That is something you must discover on your own. It is not something that can be explained in words. You must understand the Scifi way before you can even begin to consider whether you are worthy." Ethan sat there, staring at the stars. He felt a mix of confusion, frustration, and curiosity. He had always prided himself on his determination. If there was one thing he knew how to do, it was to face challenges head-on. But this was different. This was a challenge he hadn't expected. And it was one that would require him to understand a whole new way of thinking. A way of life that was foreign to him. "I'll do whatever it takes," Ethan said finally, his voice steady. "I want to prove myself." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally she nodded. "We will see," she said softly, as the two of them sat in silence. Watching the stars above them, Ethan couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just about proving his worth to Lyra, it was about understanding an entirely new culture. One that was as mysterious as it was beautiful. Perhaps in doing so, he would find something more than just a love story. He would find a purpose he never knew he needed. Ethan woke up the next morning with a heavy feeling in his chest. The conversation from the night before kept replaying in his mind. Lyra's words echoed in his thoughts. "You cannot marry someone like me." He had hoped it was just a misunderstanding. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt real. There was something deeper, something that went beyond attraction and affection. Lyra had said it was about proving himself. But how could he even begin to understand what she meant by that? As he walked to the small research station where he was working, his mind was still racing. He had learned a lot about the Scifi people over the past few months, but there was so much more he didn't understand. He had no idea what kind of trials Lyra was talking about. How could someone like him, someone from Earth, someone who had never faced anything like this, possibly be worthy of her? Ethan was determined to find out. He couldn't let it go. He had already felt a deep connection to Lyra, and now, more than ever, he wanted to understand her world. He wanted to prove that he could be a part of it. That afternoon, he met Lyra again, this time in the research center. She was waiting by the entrance, as calm and composed as ever. Soft violet. Eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Ethan wasn't sure what to say, but he knew he needed to ask. "Lyra," he started, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about the trials. What do I have to do to prove myself? Can I show that I'm worthy?" Lyra studied him for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully. Finally, she spoke. "The trials are not something that can be explained in one conversation. They are a part of our culture, our history. You must be willing to take the first step without knowing exactly where it will lead." Ethan felt a mix of frustration and curiosity. "But how can I take the first step if I don't know where it leads?" he asked, his voice edged with impatience. Lyra smiled softly, her expression gentle. "That is the essence of the trials. They are not meant to be understood immediately. You must trust the process, trust that you will learn what you need to." Along the way, Ethan didn't like that answer. He was a man who liked to have a plan, to understand what was ahead of him. But this was different. There was no blueprint, no clear path to follow. He would have to walk into the unknown, and that was a scary thought. "But how do I start?" he asked again, his determination clear in his voice. Lyra's smile deepened, as if she had been waiting for him to ask this question. "The first step is simple," she said. "You must learn to understand the Scifi way. You must spend time with us, immerse yourself in our culture, and begin to understand the deeper meaning of our traditions." Ethan nodded slowly. "I've been trying to learn everything I can about your people, but there's so much more I don't know." "You cannot rush it," Lyra said. "The trials are not just about knowledge or strength. They're about your connection to the Scifi way of life. You must show that you can respect it, that you understand it. Ethan felt a sense of clarity, though it wasn't enough to ease his nerves. He knew that this wasn't going to be easy. He would have to do more than just read books or study the history of the Zorothi. He would have to live their way of life, think like them, understand their values. It was a challenge he wasn't sure he was ready for. But there was no turning back now. For the next few days, Ethan focused entirely on immersing himself in the Zorothi culture. He spent time with Lyra, listening to her explain the complex philosophies of her people. He learned about the deep respect the Zorothi had for nature, their reverence for all life, and their belief in balance and harmony. He began to understand that their way of life was not about dominating nature or bending it to their will. It was about living in harmony with it, understanding that every action had a ripple effect on the world around them. Ethan also began to notice the small details that made the Zorothi culture unique. They valued humility, patience, and quiet strength. They did not boast about their accomplishments or seek recognition for their achievements. Instead, they focused on helping one another, working together for the greater good. Ethan realized that these were the qualities Lyra had been speaking of when she mentioned the trials. It wasn't about proving his strength in a battle or outsmarting others. It was about showing that he could embrace these values and live them. Every day, one evening, as they sat outside, watching the twin moons rise in the sky, Lyra turned to him with a serious expression. "You have learned much," she said softly. "But there is one final part of the trial that you must understand before you can proceed." Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding. "What is it?" His voice full of anticipation. "The final part is not something you can learn from books or words," Lyra said. "It is something you must discover within yourself." Ethan was puzzled. "What do you mean?" Lyra's gaze softened. "The final trial is not about knowledge or action. It is about your heart. You must understand what it truly means to commit to sacrifice for the greater good." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest. He wasn't sure what Lyra meant, but he could tell it was something deep, something that would challenge him in ways he hadn't expected. The first trials had been hard, but this was different. It felt personal, like it was something he would have to face on his own. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady, despite the uncertainty inside him. Lyra smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "We will see," she said, her voice gentle, but filled with meaning, as Ethan sat there. Looking at the stars, he realized that this journey was not just about proving his worth to Lyra. It was about understanding a whole new way of life, deeper connection to the universe, and the values that held everything together. He wasn't just fighting for her love anymore. He was fighting to become someone worthy of it. Ethan woke up early the next morning, the sky still dark with only the faintest light from the two moons. His mind was full of thoughts from the night before. Lyra had said the final part of the trial was about understanding his heart, about knowing what it truly meant to commit and sacrifice for something bigger than himself. Ethan didn't fully understand what that meant, but he knew one thing. He was ready to face whatever it took. As he sat up in his small quarters, he thought about the last few days. He had spent countless hours learning about the Zorothi way of life, trying to understand their culture, their values, and their beliefs. He had always considered himself an open-minded person, but what he had learned from Lyra and the Zorothi people was something entirely new. It wasn't just about knowing facts or memorizing information. It was about changing the way he thought, about seeing the world in a different light. The past few days had been difficult. There were moments when Ethan felt overwhelmed by the complexity of it all. The Zorothi didn't just view the world as a place to live. They saw everything in relation to the greater universe, the balance of life, and the interconnectedness of all things. They didn't see themselves as separate from nature. They were a part of it. And for Ethan, that was a hard concept to grasp, but he had also started to see the beauty in it. The Zorothi's way wasn't about domination or control. It was about living with respect, understanding that every action had consequences. They valued patience and humility, and they didn't rush decisions or force anything. Everything was done with careful thought and consideration. It was a way of life that Ethan had never experienced before, but he felt drawn to it, especially when he thought about Lyra. Her calm, graceful presence had become a symbol of everything he had been learning. He admired her strength, not the kind that came from physical power, the quiet strength that came from knowing who you were and living according to your beliefs. Ethan knew that if he wanted to prove himself worthy of her, he would have to do more than just learn about the Zorthi. He would have to live like them, think like them, and embrace their way of life. He was ready to try, but he also knew that he wasn't perfect. He still had a lot to learn, and that thought both motivated and scared him. Later that morning, he met with Lyra in the central gathering place of the research station. The area was quiet, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, and the air was thick with the scent of alien flowers. Lyra was standing by a small table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. As usual, she wore the simple, flowing robes of her people, and her hair shimmered in the soft light. "Good morning," Ethan said as he approached her, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his thoughts. "Good morning, Ethan," Lyra replied, her violet eyes meeting his. There was something in her gaze that seemed to search for something, as if she could see right through him. "How are you feeling today?" Ethan hesitated for a moment. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about the trials and what I need to understand. I want to do this, Lyra. I want to prove that I can be worthy of you and your people." Lyra smiled softly, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "It is not about proving yourself to me, Ethan. It is about proving to yourself that you can understand the values we live by. The Zorthi way is not something you can achieve overnight. It takes time, patience, and a deep understanding of what it means to be truly committed." "I understand," Ethan said, though part of him wasn't sure he did. He had always prided himself on his quick thinking and his ability to adapt to new situations, but this was different. The Zorthi didn't rush through life. It took things slowly, carefully, and with great thought. Lyra stepped closer to him, her eyes still locked on his. "Do you remember the first lesson I taught you? About balance?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, you said everything is connected. That all life, all actions have consequences, and we must live with that in mind." Lyra smiled, her expression softening. "Good. That is the first step. Understanding that every decision we make affects the world around us, but there is more to it than just knowledge. The second part is living with that knowledge every day." Ethan frowned slightly, confused. "Living with it?" "Yes," Lyra said. "It is not enough to understand something intellectually. You must embody it in your actions. You must live in harmony with everything around you. This is the second part of the trial, to demonstrate that you can live the Zorthi way, to show that you can make decisions based on the greater good, not just what benefits you." Ethan felt a surge of uncertainty. He wasn't sure how to apply what he had learned to his own life. He had always made decisions based on what seemed best for him, what would get him ahead. But now he realized the choices he made had to be about something more. "What do you mean by the greater good?" Ethan asked. "How do I know what that is?" Lyra's gaze softened. "The greater good is not about personal gain. It is about thinking beyond yourself, about considering the impact of your actions on others and on the world around you. It is about making choices that help the whole, not just the individual." Ethan nodded slowly, trying to process what she had said. It was a lot to take in. He had always been a man who thought about the here and now, but Lyra's words challenged everything he had known. What if making the right choice meant giving up something he wanted? What if the greater good required him to sacrifice his own desires for something larger? Lyra seemed to sense his hesitation. "Do not fear the unknown, Ethan," she said softly. "The trials are not meant to break you. They are meant to show you the path to help you find the strength you did not know you had." Ethan looked at her, her words resonating deep within him. He had come to this planet for a mission, but now he was on a different journey, one that would take him places he hadn't expected. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time, he felt ready to take that first step. "I'll do it, Lyra," he said quietly. "I'll take the first step. I'll live the way you've taught me." Lyra smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Then the trials have already begun." As Ethan stood there, looking at the woman who had changed his life in so many ways, he knew that this journey wasn't just about proving his worth to Lyra. It was about proving his worth to himself, to show that he could live with purpose and make the kind of choices that would benefit not just him, but the world around him. The trials had begun, and Ethan was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed felt like a blur to Ethan. The weight of the trials had settled on him, and every choice he made seemed more important than the last. He had learned that the Zarathi didn't make decisions lightly. Every step, every action, had to be carefully thought through, considering the effects on both the individual and the collective. Ethan wasn't used to this kind of thinking. Back on Earth, decisions were often made quickly, based on the present moment. But here, with the Zarathi, everything had to be about the future, about balance, and about the consequences of every choice. It was a way of life that made him question the way he had lived before. Lyra had given him the second part of the trial to show that he could make decisions for the greater good. She had told him that he needed to start living the Zarathi way, making choices that would benefit everyone, not just himself. But Ethan wasn't sure where to start. He wasn't sure how to apply these lessons to his own life. That evening, Lyra invited him to join her on a visit to a nearby village. It was a small settlement of Zarathi people who lived in harmony with the land. Their homes were built into the trees, designed to blend in with the natural surroundings. It was a peaceful place where the Zarathi lived simply, focusing on the needs of the community rather than individual desires. As they walked through the village, Lyra spoke of the importance of balance. She explained how the Zarathi people worked together, each person contributing to the greater good. Everyone had a role to play, and no one was more important than the other. There was no hierarchy, no division. It was a place where all were valued equally. Ethan observed everything closely. The people here seemed content, working together without the stress or hurry that he was used to back home. It was a slow, steady way of life, but it was also one that brought peace. There was no rush, no competition. Zarathi didn't seem to care about being the best or having the most. They cared about the well-being of their people and their planet. After a while, Lyra led him to a small gathering place in the center of the village. There, the village leaders were discussing ways to improve their water supply. It wasn't a major issue, but it was something they had noticed could be better. Ethan listened carefully as they discussed different solutions. Some proposed building a new system, while others suggested finding a way to use the existing resources more efficiently. Each idea was carefully considered, weighed for its potential impact on the village and the environment. Ethan was impressed by how thoughtful and patient the process was. There was no rush to make a decision. Everyone took their time, considering all possible outcomes. It was a lesson in patience and humility, something he had struggled with in the past. He had always been someone who wanted to move quickly, too. Solve problems as fast as possible.
Out by tear. He realized that wasn't the way of the Zarathi. They understood that the best solutions were often the ones that took time to develop. As the meeting ended, Lyra turned to Ethan with a soft smile.
"Do you understand now?" she asked. Ethan nodded slowly. "I think so," he said. "It's not just about finding the quickest solution. It's about making the right one, even if it takes longer." Lyra smiled again. "Exactly. You see, it's not just about fixing problems. It's about understanding the bigger picture, about how everything is connected. Every choice we make affects the world around us. The Zarathi don't act impulsively. We take our time, we think carefully, and we always consider the consequences." Ethan was quiet for a moment, letting her words sink in. He realized how much he had to learn. The Zarathi way wasn't about rushing to be the best or getting ahead. It was about being mindful of every action, understanding the impact it had on the world and the people around you. It was a way of life that made sense, but it was also one that required great patience and humility. As they left the village, Lyra led Ethan to a quiet spot by a river. The sound of the water flowing gently over the rocks was calming, and the soft glow of the twin moons above added to the peaceful atmosphere. "Ethan," Lyra said, her voice quiet, "the next step in your trial is not just about making decisions. For the greater good, it's about understanding that sometimes the greater good means making sacrifices. Right? It means giving up something you want for something that will benefit everyone." Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean by that?" Lyra's gaze was steady, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. The Zorthi believe that true commitment is not about taking what you want. It is about giving up your own desires when the need arises, when it is for the benefit of the whole. There will come a time when you will have to make a choice that will require you to sacrifice something important to you. That is the true test. Ethan swallowed hard. He had always thought that sacrifice was a difficult thing to do, but now he understood that it wasn't just about giving something up. It was about choosing the greater good over personal gain. It was about putting others before yourself, even. When it was hard, what kind of sacrifice? Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She stood silently by the river, watching the water flow. After a long pause, she spoke again. That is something you will have to decide for yourself, Ethan. But remember, sacrifice is not about losing something. It is about gaining something greater in the end. Ethan looked at her, feeling both scared and inspired. He wasn't sure what kind of sacrifice he would have to make, but he knew one thing. He wasn't ready to give up. Zorthi had shown him a way of life he had never imagined, and now he had to prove that he could live by their values, even when it meant making difficult choices. I'll do whatever it takes, he said quietly, more to himself than to Lyra. Lyra looked at him, her expression soft but firm. Then you are ready, Ethan. The trial will continue. But remember, it is not the end that matters. It is the journey. As Ethan stood there, listening to the gentle flow of the river, he realized that this journey was more than just about proving himself to Lyra or to the Zorthi. It was about finding his own path, one that was not defined by his past, but by the choices he made moving forward. And though the road ahead seemed uncertain, he was ready to walk it no matter what sacrifices it might require. The days seemed to blend together as Ethan continued his journey through the trials. With each passing day, he felt both challenged and inspired. The lessons Lyra had taught him about patience, humility, and making decisions for the greater good were beginning to settle into his mind. But now, he was faced with something even more difficult, a test of his heart. Lyra had spoken about sacrifice, about putting the needs of others before his own desires. But Ethan had never truly understood the depth of that lesson until now. He had always been someone who thought of himself first, someone who made decisions based on what would benefit him most. Now he had to rethink everything. Lyra's words echoed in his mind. True commitment is not about taking what you want. It is about giving up your own desires when the need arises, when it is for the benefit of the whole. Ethan had always thought that sacrifice meant giving something up, but now he was beginning to realize that it was more than that. It was about understanding what was truly important. That afternoon, Lyra invited him to join her on a trip to the Zorthi temple. It was a place of deep spiritual significance for her people, a place where the Zorthi came to reflect on their values and connect with the universe. The temple was located high in the mountains, surrounded by lush forests and peaceful streams. The air was thin and crisp, and as they climbed the winding path, Ethan could feel the weight of the journey on his shoulders. When they reached the temple, Ethan was awestruck by its beauty. The structure was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was carved into the side of the mountain, with delicate arches and intricate designs that seemed to blend seamlessly with the natural surroundings. The walls were made of stone, but there were vines and flowers growing over them, adding a softness to the hard surfaces. The temple looked as if it had been a part of the mountain for centuries, as if it had always been there. Inside, the temple was filled with quiet reverence. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the soft glow of the lanterns illuminated the carved stone walls. Ethan could feel the weight of history in the air, as if the temple held the wisdom of generations. Lyra led him to a small alcove in the back of the temple. There, a stone altar stood, surrounded by soft cushions where the Zorthi meditated. The altar was simple but beautiful, with a carved symbol at its center. It was a symbol of balance, of life and death, of the connection between all things. This is where we come to reflect, Lyra explained softly. Here, we can meditate on the choices we make, on the path we have chosen, and on the sacrifices we have made for the greater good. It is a place of peace and understanding. Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. He had spent so much time thinking about the trials, about proving himself, that he had never stopped to truly reflect on why he was doing this. He had been so focused on the idea of winning Lyra's respect that he had forgotten the most important part of the journey, understanding himself, as they sat in the alcove. Lyra spoke of the Zorathi's most sacred tradition, the ceremony of the heart. It was a ritual that every Zorathi went through when they reached adulthood. It's a rite of passage that marked their commitment to their people and to the universe. Ceremony was not about gaining power or prestige. It was about letting go of personal desires and embracing the greater good. The ceremony of the heart is not easy, Lyra explained. It requires each individual to make a sacrifice, something deeply personal, something they value more than anything. It is a test of true commitment, a test of one's ability to put the needs of others before their own. Ethan listened closely, his mind racing. This sounded like the final test, the ultimate challenge. He could already feel the weight of the decision that lay ahead. But what was the sacrifice he would have to make? What would it be? And how would he know if he was ready to give it up? "Do you know what your sacrifice will be?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra turned to him, her eyes thoughtful. "I have already made my sacrifice," she said softly. "When I was younger, I had to choose between my personal desires and the needs of my people. It was the hardest decision I have ever made, but it was the right one. It was my commitment to the Zorathi way, to the balance of the universe." Ethan nodded, understanding what she was saying. But the question still hung in his mind. What would his sacrifice be? Later that night, as they sat under the stars, Ethan found himself lost in thought. He had been so focused on proving himself, on earning Lyra's respect, that he hadn't truly understood the deeper meaning of the trials. It wasn't about proving his strength or his intellect. It was about understanding the importance of sacrifice, of giving up something valuable for the greater good. The stars above them sparkled brightly, and for a moment Ethan felt as if the universe was watching, waiting for him to make his choice. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that this trial was more than just about him. It was about his place in the universe, his connection to the world around him. "I'm ready," Ethan whispered to himself. He didn't know what the sacrifice would be, but he was ready to face it. He was ready to put the needs of others before his own desires, to make a choice that would honor the greater good. Lyra turned to him, sensing the change in his heart. "The trials are not about winning or losing, Ethan," she said quietly. "They are about understanding that true commitment is not about taking what you want, but about giving up what you love for something greater." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The trials had not been easy, but they had brought him closer to understanding the Zorathi way, to understanding what it truly meant to commit to something larger than himself. As he sat under the stars, Ethan realized that this journey was not just about proving himself to Lyra. It was about proving to himself that he could live with purpose, that he could make choices that honored the greater good. And no matter what sacrifice lay ahead, he was ready to face it. The morning after the quiet night under the stars, Ethan woke up with a sense of resolve. The trials had taken him far beyond what he had expected. What had started as a simple desire to prove himself to Lyra had become something much deeper. The journey had shifted from wanting to impress her to understanding the very essence of commitment, sacrifice, and living for the greater good. Ethan felt both terrified and proud of how far he had come. He had learned to consider the larger impact of his decisions, to live in a way that valued patience, humility, and respect for the world around him. But the final step of the trial still weighed on him. He knew it wasn't over. Not yet. There was one final test left, the sacrifice. Lyra had spoken of it many times. But Ethan had never truly understood what it meant until now. He had been told that this final test would require him to give up something he cherished, something he held dear. The Zorathi way was about selflessness, but what could he give up? He wasn't sure, and that uncertainty kept gnawing at him. That afternoon, Lyra invited him to join her on a trip to a nearby part of the planet. The area was far away from the main settlement, a place where few humans had visited. It was a lush valley filled with strange, alien plants and animals, a place that was as wild and untouched as the land could be. Lyra had told him that the valley was sacred to the Zorathi, a place where they would go to meditate, to reflect on their lives and their decisions. Ethan had been to many places on the planet, but nothing had quite prepared him for this. As they arrived at the edge of the valley, he could feel the silence of the place, as if it held a secret. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers, and the sound of a distant waterfall echoed through the trees. It was beautiful, in a way that felt ancient and unspoiled. He stood there, breathing it in, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. Lyra led him deeper into the valley, her steps light and graceful, as if she were part of the very earth beneath her feet. Ethan followed her, his thoughts still racing. He knew the moment was coming. He could feel it, the weight of the final decision. What was he supposed to sacrifice? How could he know what to give up? As they walked, Lyra spoke to him about the importance of this place. "The valley is a reflection of our world," she said. "It is untouched, raw, but also balanced. The Zorathi believe that every living thing has a purpose, and our role is to understand and respect that purpose." Ethan listened, absorbing her words, but his mind kept drifting back to his own dilemma. It wasn't until they reached a small clearing near the waterfall that Lyra stopped and turned to him.
Oh.
The air around them was thick with the soft hum of alien insects, and the light seemed to shimmer off the water. "This is where the final trial begins," Lyra said. Her voice was quiet, almost reverent. "You've already shown that you understand the Zorathi way. You've demonstrated patience, humility, and a willingness to learn.
Ow.
But now, Ethan, you must show that you are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This was it. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew that this moment would define everything. Lyra's eyes were steady, watching him as if she could see straight through him. "I've learned so much," Ethan said, trying to steady his voice. "But I'm still not sure what the sacrifice is. What do I have to give up? It's the right choice." Lyra smiled softly, her gaze kind and patient. "You will know when the time comes," she said. "The Zorathi do not teach us what to sacrifice. It is a personal decision. I can tell you, this whatever you choose, it must be something you love. It must be something that has meaning to you, something you cannot easily let go of." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He had never been faced with such a difficult decision. There were so many things he cared about: his family, his mission, his life on Earth. But could he truly give them up for something greater? He had already learned that living for the greater good meant making difficult choices, but this felt like it would be the hardest choice of all. Lyra gave him a moment of silence, allowing him time to think. The sound of the waterfall seemed louder now, almost overwhelming in its peacefulness. The weight of the decision hung in the air, and Ethan knew he couldn't delay it any longer. He had to make his choice. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan finally spoke. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. "I understand that the sacrifice is about putting the greater good first. But what if that means giving up everything I know?" Lyra nodded slowly. "That is a possibility. The sacrifice may be something you've held dear for a long time. Remember, it's not about losing something. It's about understanding that sometimes we must let go of what we love in order to create something better." Ethan took a deep breath, looking at the waterfall and then back at Lyra. He knew what he had to do. The journey had taught him that his own desires, his own comforts, were not as important as the bigger picture, the balance of the universe, and the well-being of others. Without another word, Ethan stepped forward, his heart heavy, but his mind clear. He looked at Lyra and nodded. "I understand," he said. "I will make the sacrifice. I will do what is necessary for the greater good." Lyra's eyes softened as she stepped closer to him. "You have already begun the most difficult part of the trial, Ethan. The path ahead will not be easy, but you have the strength to walk it." As they stood there side by side, the sound of the waterfall flowing gently in the background, Ethan realized that the trial wasn't just about proving himself to Lyra. It was about proving to himself that he could live a life of purpose.
8-1.
where he could make the hard choices even when it meant letting go of what he loved most. The true test was not just in what he would sacrifice, but in his ability to trust that his actions would lead to something greater than himself.